It's an everyday thing, it's an everyday thing, it's an everyday thing when you let your nuts hang.
How was I supposed to explain or put into words that my ex-husband thought he was the Antichrist and the God of War? So much had happened in the span of 3 weeks that I really had no idea what was happening, and everything was moving so quickly. I just knew that I had to get emergency full custody for our own safety. A year ago today is when I sat in front of a judge and was granted full custody. Walking into the courtroom that day, I had no idea if my ex-husband was actually going to show up. Right before I walked in, I saw that he was live streaming. While he was busy live streaming, I was having a full-blown panic attack walking into the courtroom for the very first time. When it was finally time for me to meet in front of the judge, I had no idea how to present myself. She already had the paperwork and evidence that I had submitted prior, and she could obviously tell I didn't want to be there, mostly because I said that several times, that I didn't want to be there and I didn't want to have to do this. Begged her to grant an emergency psych evaluation, but because he didn't show up, she couldn't do that, so she immediately granted me with 3-year restraining order and full legal and physical custody. Everything that happened when those words came out of her mouth is really fuzzy because I couldn't stop crying and I feel like I blacked out. All I could really think about was how I was going to explain this to the kids. Up until this point, all they knew was that Dad was looking for a job. While I was in court that day, my mom had called me to tell me that the police showed up at our door because a former coworker of his wanted to do a wellness check. She covered for me and told the kids that the police were only there because we had left the trash bins outside for too long. Because the restraining order was granted, my family actually ended up leaving that night, so I slept in the same bed as my kids, and at 1 a.m. I actually woke up to my ex-husband's car pulling up in the driveway. A few months after I filed for divorce, my ex-husband quit his job and abruptly stopped taking the medication he had been on for about 6 to 7 years. Because he wasn't working, he started going to the gym twice a day and meeting people everywhere he went. I don't think anyone thought there was anything wrong with that because people have divorce glow-ups all the time and start changing their lives. The financial aspect of this story is really important because it's going to come up later on, but I had my own bank account and started picking up a lot more photography work and luckily started to make money on social media while he was still out of a job, and it seemed like he wasn't really looking. The only problem was we were still on a joint checking account and joint credit cards. For some reason, he wasn't removing my name from the accounts as the account holder, so I kept putting money into these accounts, but we were still going into major debt on our credit cards. Fast forward to November of last year when things started to become really religious, where he started referencing Bible verses, things from the Quran, and several other religious books. I think his family and everyone around him assumed that he was having, some sort of coming to God situation. Personally, for me, I felt like something was extremely wrong because he was becoming a lot more short-tempered and angry with me, but everyone else was having a positive experience with him, so I didn't want to sound like that bitter ex-wife who wasn't happy for him. It was just before Thanksgiving when he dropped the kids off at my house, and he kind of stayed a little after. I was sitting on the couch while he was pacing back and forth, telling me about this religious experience that he just had. Where he was sitting in the car when he all of a sudden smelled sulfur. I didn't know this at the time, but he explained to me that the smell of sulfur meant you were in the presence of Satan. He then proceeded to tell me that Satan and God both appeared and started fighting in his head. While he was telling the story, it sent chills down my whole body, and I had no idea what to say. I was so uncomfortable and started becoming really scared. So I just kind of let him continue to speak because he had the kids that weekend, and I was contemplating in my head what I was going to do about that. I'd never experienced anything like this in my entire life, so I assumed that it was drug or alcohol related, so I told him that I wanted to take him to get a drug test before he was going to take the kids that weekend. Long story short, everything did come back clean except for THC, which I had already known about. At that point, I did reach out to my in-laws and explain to them that I felt like something was extremely wrong, and I didn't know what it was, but I told them that I couldn't let him take the kids that weekend. The weekend he was supposed to have the kids is when things really escalated. I would wake up to about 350 text messages from him, so I knew he wasn't sleeping, and because I had his Tesla location being on the account, I could see that he was visiting cemeteries, he was driving around all night. I never responded to a single text because I just wanted to know what was happening and understand what was going on in his mind. I couldn't even explain to you what was in these text messages because they honestly made no sense. It was something of another reality. He was talking about being the Antichrist and the God of War. He started video messaging myself, his friends, and even started making YouTube videos that became really, really terrifying. Things about how he would fight my kids to rule Mars and torture and smite them, and things that you don't hear in real life. At this point, I really started to feel like this was mental health related, that something had snapped, something had happened, and I was scared for our lives. Constantly hear about something terrible happening to an ex-wife and kids, and I didn't want us to be part of that story. Not only was I afraid for us, but I was afraid for him. His personality really started to change into more of a rage and anger, and it was really terrifying to talk to him. And all he could talk about and all the music he would send me was just really evil, dark things. Because he was driving around all night and wasn't sleeping, I started becoming really afraid that he would come to our home and do something that he didn't mean to do. I will share some of the text messages on my Instagram story just so you can get an idea of what was going on. At this point, I knew he wasn't in his right mind, but I didn't know what he was capable of. I just knew I had to protect myself and the kids. I was so afraid, but luckily I had the guidance of a friend who had pushed me to get a restraining order. By the time we realized that this was mental health related, it was already too late. Things had escalated so much that none of us could recognize who this person was anymore. He talked a lot about being the God of War, and I didn't really know what that was, but I did know that it was a video game he used to play, and in the story, apparently this guy goes into rage mode and ends up killing his wife. It seemed as though every single game and movie he had ever seen in his life was being reenacted in his mind. To be honest with you guys, I didn't think it was going to last more than 2 to 3 weeks. The same day I was granted the restraining order, my family went home because they assumed I was protected. The only problem was he wasn't served yet and he had no idea that I had done that. Because I had his location, I could see where he was, and he was always driving around aimlessly, but the scary thing was he only lived 7 minutes down the road. Normally, I'm never able to sleep without a fan, but there was no way I was going to bed without being able to hear everything that happened in this house. At this point, I haven't told the kids what was happening yet, so I just told them we would have a slumber party in my room for the night. I felt like I was never getting any good sleep at the time, and I would always wake up to look at his location. Genuinely, that was something I was so grateful for, because it wasn't only for my peace of mind, but also because I was worried about him and where he was going and where he would end up. I was so afraid something would happen to him, so I was constantly looking at where he was. Around 1 a.m. that night, I happened to wake up and look at his location, and luckily he was nowhere near me, but he was driving around. I tried to go back to sleep, but my mind was still half awake. Just when I felt like I was starting to drift off, I got a notification on my phone from my Ring doorbell with his car pulling up into my driveway. The scariest part about that was he had my garage door opener. Luckily, I had changed the garage door code earlier that day. Otherwise, I don't know what would have happened. When I tell you my heart sank, I can't even put it into words. I just looked at the kids and I looked at the Ring doorbell and I ran into my closet. I immediately called 911 because based on the text messages I was getting from him, I did not feel safe. I had a front door camera and a garage door camera, so I could see that he was going from my front door to the garage and back and forth. When I called 911 that night, I was so scared. You constantly hear about the worst possible scenario happening. I was afraid that something would happen and he would get hurt. I begged and pleaded for the police to understand that this was mental health related. While I was waiting for the police to get there, I was watching the cameras, and he would switch between his normal voice, which was just innocent and fun, and a second voice which was very deep and demonic. This is not a person who would ever put hands on me or the kids ever in our lives, but I didn't recognize the person who was at my door. The police happened to get there about 3 minutes after I called, and they tried to talk him into going with him to a hospital, but he refused to even talk to them. Because he hadn't done anything illegal, they obviously couldn't do anything. When the police came inside to speak with me, I had shown them the restraining order that I had received that day, but I told them that he didn't know about it and that I haven't served him yet, so they went ahead and served him for me. My heart was just breaking because in my mind, I just felt like he was in there somewhere, and I didn't want him to think I was abandoning him or didn't want him to be around, but I just truly didn't know who that person was anymore, and I was scared. Police were telling me that he wasn't cooperating with them and that they would have to let him go. So I begged the police to let me go out and speak with him in their presence. When I walked outside, I couldn't help but cry because I was looking at a person that I had known for the last 10 years, but I didn't recognize him. He didn't have a shirt on, but I happened to have a sweatshirt and a sports bra under, so I took off my sweater and gave it to him. I was hoping that seeing him would ground him back to reality, because at this point I hadn't seen him in 2 weeks. I begged and pleaded with him to just please trust me and to go to a hospital, because this wasn't him. Despite our divorce, I obviously still cared about him. I thought it would be long enough not to get emotional, but here we are. As the father of my kids and my ex, I obviously still cared about his well-being. Luckily, he did agree to go voluntarily, so the police had taken him in. And within those few hours that he was there, it went from voluntary to involuntary hold. At that point, he was on a 5150 hold, and I was so hopeful that this was the end, that things would get better from here. This was all happening December 14th of last year, just a few weeks before Christmas. So I was hoping that this hospital would help him and he would get out and be normal again. When he got there, he thankfully put me as the emergency contact, even though legally he wasn't allowed to with the restraining order. But every single day I checked in with the nurses and the doctors, and I made sure that they knew that this was not normal behavior, this was not his usual character, and this was completely out of the blue. Unfortunately, he fought them tooth and nail and told them that he couldn't take medication for religious reasons. 8 days later, I got a call from a doctor telling me that they were going to release him, and I begged them not. I begged them and told them that they were making the wrong decision and that he was going to end up hurting himself or someone else. Did end up releasing him after 8 days, even though he had no one to watch after him. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end here, and things just happened to get so much worse once he started posting online. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, they absolutely did. I do want to rewind back when the police showed up at my house, because that night he actually did throw his phone and completely shatter and break it. So before he was released, I made sure to put his number on an older phone and charge his car so it was ready for him when he was released. I knew at this point I could no longer enable this behavior. Once he decided to check himself out of the hospital, I decided I was no longer going to put money into our joint account. I was working overtime on trying to get myself separated, but it was so hard when he was the authorized user on most of the accounts. And if you're new to my story, you know that I was mostly a stay-at-home mom and he was always the main provider. That December, his parents decided they would pay his rent for the month just to see where things went, because again, we didn't think this was going to last very long. Once he was out, there was no longer any more communication between us because it was a no contact restraining order and he could get in a lot of trouble for that. Once he was released, I had to move his car 100 yards away per the restraining order. I knew once he was released, he would be really upset with me for not helping him get out, but I could still see that he needed a lot more help, but he didn't think he needed any. Within 72 hours of being released, he was spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars on random things, racking up the credit card, and blowing through whatever was left of our joint account. Remember that the financial aspect of this is really important for the remainder of the story. The entire time this was going on, I was still posting online, hoping to God that none of this would hit the internet. Meanwhile, a friend messages me to let me know that he started posting online. He had never had social media prior, so I had no idea where this was going to go. At this point, I started posting less and less because the search bar and the comments were just going crazy, and I was getting so much anxiety. My online safe space quickly became my worst nightmare. Even though he was the one putting himself out there, I didn't want to bring any more attention to this because I didn't know how much worse it would get. Unfortunately, it didn't take long for the people who knew me to start following him and ask him really inappropriate and intrusive questions that they knew I would never answer. He told everyone about the restraining order and he was answering all the questions despite how inappropriate they were. Do I partly blame myself for the things that happened afterwards? Yes, because I shared this space online with him, and if I had never done that, this wouldn't have happened. I regret ever sharing this space, but I also never knew that this would happen. It didn't take long for the algorithm to put 2 and 2 together and start pulling up his videos after mine. I can understand that people can be nosy and they probably didn't know what was going on yet, but it didn't take long to see that something wasn't right. A few people mentioned this in the comments, and I do also want to touch on this, that he was big on numbers and drawings, things that I couldn't understand and things I've never seen him talk about before. He just kept saying that this was his purpose and he needed to wake people up. I want to be clear that I don't hold any of this against him today because I know he wasn't in his right mind, but at the time it was really painful to see how little he cared about me and the kids while I was killing myself still trying to help him. I felt abandoned and neglected while he was just having so much fun online and ignoring any sort of responsibility. I made sure to turn on the overdraft settings in our joint bank account, but it didn't take long for him to move on to the credit card and start racking that up with my name still on it. Before anyone says anything, yes, obviously I tried so many times to get my name off of it, explaining to them that I had a restraining order and all this stuff was happening. I spoke to so many people, but they couldn't help me. In his mind, he didn't believe that money was real, nor did it matter, which was another reminder that he was not in his right mind. There was just a lot going on. I'm gonna be honest when I say my empathy quickly turned into anger, because while I was trying to keep a roof over our heads, feed the kids, deal with the bills, health insurance, and so many other things, he was busy online having the time of his life. My mind is currently racing with everything that happened and where to even start, because every day, every week felt like an entire year because so much was happening. He started blowing through the credit card so quickly until he realized there was only a few hundred left. His dad and I agreed that I would spend the remainder of the money in hopes that he would finally get help. I chose to spend it on getting clothing for the kids. Little did I know what would happen next. I knew people online could be evil, I just didn't know how evil they could be. At this point, anyone who had seen his content already knew that I had a restraining order in place, but again, I have never said anything on my page yet because I didn't want to draw more attention to this. The only problem was these people were coming into my comments and causing problems, telling me that I was a terrible mother for keeping the kids from their dad. They obviously didn't have the full story, but anyone with a brain could clearly see that something wasn't right. If they couldn't tell, someone else was telling them. Once I had spent the remainder of the money on our credit card, my ex-husband was not happy about that and did voice his opinions about it online. For the most part, he only had positive things to say about me online because I think deep down he knew that I cared about him and that I'm not the type of person to do anything that wasn't in his best interest. That didn't stop other people from coming to attack me. I do want to clarify that not everyone who interacted with him came from my page. There was a lot of people he attracted that never knew who I was. But there were still a lot of people who knew who I was, knew my story, knew that I wasn't saying a word about this, and still came to attack me, telling me how terrible of a mother I was, reporting my content and leaving the nastiest comments and messages. There was times my ex-husband would go on rants about me and then go back and tell them not to attack me because this is my job and this is how I'm keeping the kids alive. When I tell you he was posting online, I don't mean occasionally, I mean every second, every day. There was a post at night, during the day, several times, and I think his account was banned at least 4 times before January 1st. He would talk a lot about how he was God, he was coming to wake people up, and people needed to worship him, so obviously you had to know that something was wrong. People would purposely go onto his live streams or posts to say something about me, trigger him, and get him all riled up. I can't tell you how many times I went back and forth between empathy, anger, sadness. There was just so many emotions where I felt like I'd finally accepted the situation and just chose to move on with my life just for me to be brought back into the moment with the next event happening. Once there was no money left, one of his followers helped him set up a Cashapp and a Venmo and a link tree to put in his bio. I'm still not sure exactly who this was, but I know he didn't do it because he never did any of that, nor did he understand that world. That was something he then called tithing. I'm not one to put women down, but these women were so desperate for attention that they would give him money, and they would say and do anything to keep them on his good side. There was one girl in particular who not only sent him weed, groceries, and other toiletries that he needed at home, but she would also go to visit him. On New Year's Eve last year, it seemed like he had gone weeks without any sleep, and he started to become really erratic. I was invited to go out with friends that night, and instead I stayed home with the kids because I was worried. Because these online people were instigating him, he started making some really scary statements about coming to get the kids. Although my family was home, I didn't feel comfortable going out on New Year's Eve because I didn't want something to happen while I was gone. Spent most of the night tracking his location to make sure that he wasn't going to show up at our house. But instead, I ended up seeing that he was with another woman. Gonna be so real with you guys, that's when my Scorpio sun instantly came into play because I went FBI mode and found out exactly who this person was. When I tell you I was livid because while I was at home fearing for our lives, he decided to go out and pick up another girl and spend New Year's Eve with this person. Not on my watch. I know my ex-husband is an attractive man, but this was not the time to shoot your shot. Because he was making online threats about coming to get the kids, I was obviously watching his location to make sure that he wouldn't show up at our house. It was around 11 o'clock that I noticed he got in his car, and I was afraid he would come to our house, but instead he ended up driving about 45 minutes away. It did ease my mind that he was driving away from us, but that was pretty normal behavior for him considering he wasn't sleeping and he was spending a lot of nights driving around. When I looked at his location about 20 minutes later, I happened to see that both doors were opening and closing. I was a little worried because again, he wasn't in his right mind and he had very erratic behavior. I don't know if everybody knows this, but if you're an authorized driver on someone's Tesla, you can literally see everything. You can see what music is playing, you can see the temperature, and control the car from the app, plus you can see everything happening outside of the car. So I ended up looking at the cameras and I saw that it was a girl. I decided to screw with them. Well, mostly her. We listen and we don't judge. Don't ask me how I found out exactly who it was. I just went into FBI mode and I found out. You guys can call me crazy and I will take full accountability for that, but I had no shame because while I was at home taking care of the kids, scared for our lives, there was some girl taking advantage of his state of mind and preventing him from getting help. Anywho, you know when you're on a first date with someone, you get a little bit nervous, maybe your palms are a little bit sweaty. That's what I imagine was going on with her because not only was she with someone who was obviously not well, could not believe that this random girl was getting in the car with someone she didn't even know considering she had seen his dangerous and erratic behaviors online. At times he was obviously calm and collected, but this was not the time to shoot your shot. That's when I decided I was gonna have a little bit of fun on New Year's Eve. As soon as they got in the car, I could see that they were playing Netflix. So I turned on her butt warmers. A few minutes later, I could see that they were shut off again, and every time they were shut off, I would turn it back on. After I screwed with the butt warmers for a while, I decided I was gonna make it very clear that I was watching. It wasn't even midnight yet, so I decided to roll down the windows, pop the trunk, and honk the car. After that, my ex definitely knew I was watching, so it looked like he dropped her off back at the bar he picked her up from. Really don't think anything intimate was happening in this car. That didn't void the fact that she never should have gone with him in the first place, considering he needed to get help. I'm very protective over the people in my life. Reminder that this is the father of my kids, and while I was trying to explain to my kids why their dad wasn't around, there was this girl taking full advantage of him. The only thing I wanted was for him to go and get help. He could have easily removed me from the app so I wouldn't see anything anymore, but he wasn't well enough to even know how to do that. Later on, this ended up becoming the same girl who would visit him a few more times and even bringing him flour and groceries. Unfortunately, this wouldn't be the last girl, and every time I started to feel angry with him for something that happened, I had to constantly remind myself that he wasn't really there. The only reason his family and I weren't sending him any money was because we wanted him to give up and get help. It hurt all of us so much to even think he was going hungry or struggling alone, but anyone who knows anything about enabling knows exactly what that means and exactly what we were doing. Because of these people sending him money and enabling him to believe that his reality in his mind was actually true, things got a lot more dangerous. There were so many people who loved and cared about him, friends, family, co-workers. So many people tried reaching out to him. He cut every single person off that wanted to help him. The only people he kept around were these enablers. I did go on 1 or 2 live streams where I didn't give too much information, but I begged people to not engage or enable if they came across my ex-husband's content. If they didn't catch that live stream, I know other people were telling them not to engage or enable. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they were not only hurting me and my family and his family, but they were also hurting him. All did it for their own selfish reasons. The next person I'll be referencing is another girl he met online. The moment this person was introduced into his life, everything got 10 times more dangerous and 10 times more scary, and sent him further and further into psychosis. The remainder of this video will include a lot of screenshots, and I won't be talking a lot about them because it makes me really emotional to think back to those moments. At this point, it's been an entire month since my ex-husband was released from the psychiatric hospital and since the last time I spoke to him. So I thought that maybe if I spoke with him again, he would change his mind. No matter how much I tried to look away and move on with my life, I was constantly reminded in my messages with screenshots and videos of how bad things were getting. This was still the father of my children and someone I had spent so much of my life with. Up until this point, anyone who tried to speak to him was walking on eggshells, so I thought that maybe if I met him where he was in that anger and let him know that I was angry and the kids needed him and he needed to suck it up and come back to us, maybe something would click and he would come back. But I was definitely wrong about that, and he raged back so hard that he lost his voice. I then tried a different strategy and met him in his world with a softer tone. I knew he was living in an alternate reality, I just didn't know how far gone it was. And things that I can't even repeat because they were so outlandish. It absolutely broke my heart to hear him like this, and I just didn't know what to do next. An hour into the call, I could see that this wasn't going anywhere, so I tried to convince him to trust me and go talk to a medical professional. That was obviously a trigger word for him, and he was not happy with me, but he did want me to speak to someone else that he had met to try to explain to me what was really going on. I had already seen enough screenshots and videos to know who this person was and how she was impacting him, but it was so much worse than you'd ever imagine. Majority of the rest of the video will be screenshots just to show you how bad it was. I'm gonna read some messages and you can tell me what you think. Mother to mother, the kids need their dad back. I don't care about his money or support. They need their real dad. For some reason, he trusts you. This spiritual journey is not what's best for my family because it's spiritually intertwined with mental health that can destroy him forever. He will never have his family back living in an alternate reality, believing he's not human with people telling him he's God and I'm queen ruling this universe. I don't know everything you've said to him, but I've seen enough to know you are in his mind guiding him further away from us. This isn't a spiritual awakening. He's going to end up homeless or dead, and my kids will no longer have their father. I'm not mad at you, but I need you to help guide him back. Tell him to trust everything I ask. Tell him to do everything I say. He needs help. I'm begging you, please. That was my first message to her. In this message, you can obviously tell how upset I was. Seeing someone you love like this is a pain I could never put into words because you're grieving someone who's still alive. The person is still here, but he's not there anymore. The only thing I wanted was for him to get help and get better. Not just for his kids, but for him too. Her response message was one of those texts with the 3 dots that you had to open, but I'll read you some pieces that she wrote. I've told him over and over to trust you and that you'll be there when you're ready, but this isn't about you fully, it's about your kids. We have 2 very different belief systems, you and I, from the sounds of it, but I really want to work with you and help because you're so right in the fact that the kids need their father. Those children are suffering right now without their father who loved them more than anything. I want to tell you a little bit about... Then she goes on to tell me her story, which I really don't care about because it's not relevant here. What Michael is currently going through right now is very much a spiritual awakening, and it is caused by trauma. It's not a mental break, it's not a midlife crisis. He's sick with mania right now because he is still healing, and that is very scary to watch, and I'm so sorry that you and your children are scared. I have been trying to push him to understand the universe the way I understand, and the way I've helped several other people deal with something very similar, if not identical. I agree that he needs help to find the root of trauma that led him down this path, but I don't believe this path means he will never gain his life back. I don't think he needs medication or hospitalization. I think he needs solitude and peace and support and most of all grace to figure it out, but he has chosen to be online and make it very, very public, which is how I got here. I'm currently trying to talk him and tell him he doesn't need to be public with this anymore. He's beginning to come out of his spiral and mania, and this part of the journey is crucial to his health and well-being. He might be acting out of control currently online, but he's not hurting anyone or himself physically. The faster he gets through this, the faster he can be there for his children, and that's all he really wants. I think he's come to a point of acceptance with every piece of information and advice I could give him. Sorry your family's going through this. I don't want to be the mediator as much as you don't want to talk or know me, and I know this is your last resort, and that's okay. I'm just trying to be supportive. She sends another message to remind me again that what he's going through is spiritual psychosis. She said, I don't believe someone like him needs medication. That's just my own moral compass. Ultimately did not respond because I just thought it was so insane that she felt like she needed to insert herself and thinks she knows better than myself and his own family. Just 24 hours later, my ex ends up sending me a video being so angry and scarier than I've ever seen him in my entire life. I sent her this video and I said, this is not a spiritual awakening. I hope you're proud. You can pause to read some of her messages here.
Come on, Ari. I hope I'm proud. What exactly is my fault here? That he trusts me more than he trusts a doctor, and that's why he wants you to talk to me so badly? Because I don't tell him he's crazy and he needs medication intervention? That's why he's effing fuming this morning. You told him to go see someone before he can see you or the kids. I didn't start any of that. I woke up and was at the dentist. I haven't even spoken to him since last night when he started raging. He was losing his stuff last night, and breaking the whole apartment because his illusion of you is breaking it, and it makes him mad. He wants you to be God, and the reason he thinks you're God is because you're the most important person to him who's loved him unconditionally until now. That's what God does. When two realities are separated like this, spiritual and earthly, you can't distinguish which one is which. He needs solitude and peace and grace to put the puzzle back together. I don't agree that this.
Not even a week later, he started getting extremely violent, punching holes in the wall, breaking things, breaking doors. In this screenshot specifically, he ended up punching a mirror and severely injuring his knuckles. Posted a video with blood dripping all over his face, and I immediately thought the worst. As you can tell, she was still inserting herself in a place she didn't belong. Things got so bad and so scary that I couldn't stand to look anymore. It was hurting me and it was killing me from the inside out. I couldn't even look at anyone in person without completely falling apart. Next to me is a screenshot that my ex-husband sent to me from her. Talk about how and what I told the kids after I was granted the 3-year restraining order. If you've been following me for a while, you know that I went from married for almost 10 years living together to then co-parenting, where he had them every other weekend and every Wednesday, which is why co-parenting was really, really important for me, because I wanted this transition to be very smooth for them. And then to a 3-year restraining order. That was obviously a really big adjustment for the kids. Once everything started to play out, you guys know that I told my kids that their dad was looking for a job, considering he had quit his job several months ago. I had to block his number from both of their iPads and tell them that dad was on a business trip and he didn't have time to talk. I knew I didn't want to tell them before they went on winter break, so I waited until a few days before Christmas. At the time, my kids were 7 and 9 years old, so I feel like they were at the age where they were really questioning everything. To be honest with you guys, I felt like they already knew something was going on, and because I told them they couldn't speak to their dad at all, I had no idea what to say because I didn't want to scare them and I didn't want them to think differently of their dad. But I knew I had to tell them the truth. At this point, the only people who knew about this were our immediate family, the school principals, their teachers, and anyone else who was coming across this stuff online. It was lunchtime around Christmas break where I told them I needed to have a serious conversation with them and talk to them about their dad. I wanted to keep everything age appropriate because I didn't want to scare them about what was going on, but I also needed them to know just in case they came across their dad at any point. He only lived 7 minutes down the road, so running into him wasn't really uncommon. Once I sat them down, I told them that dad was making really unsafe decisions and we couldn't see him again until he got help. Then I asked them if they had any questions, and obviously they had several questions for me, but I tried to keep it age appropriate and tried not to scare them. Based on text messages and other things I was receiving, it was just not safe for him to be around the kids, so I told them that if they ended up running into him or saw him anywhere, they needed to run away and call me immediately. No matter what had happened between their dad and I's marriage, I never wanted them to see their dad differently. I wanted them to have their own relationship with him and make their own judgment. So this was something I took very seriously. A few days later, it was Christmas, so Santa brought them Apple Watches just so that way when they went back to school, I could always be in communication with them. I'm not going to go into too much detail about how my kids were feeling and how they were handling this, but you can only imagine how sad and upset they were. I spent a lot of nights consoling them, and their number one question was when they could see dad again. It hurt me so much that I wasn't able to answer that question, but I was also wondering, when would this end? I had no idea when this would end, so I kept reiterating that we needed to wait until dad decided to get help. I'm not exaggerating when I say it was not safe for him to be around the kids. Once the kids went back to school, it was very obvious that the parents and staff knew about what was going on. Many of the parents were scared about what they came across, so they would either call the principal or call the police. At this point, I'd been on calls with the police officer almost every day because people online were also calling the police on him. I was on the phone with mental health officers every single day, begging them and asking them what needed to happen for them to take him in again. Like I mentioned in the last video, the last girl he was introduced to ended up making things so much worse, not only for him, but for me and my family, because she not only told him that I was a narcissist and was turning him against his own family, but she also told him that she had a team of lawyers behind him helping him get the kids back. Not only was she lying to him, but she was also putting me and my kids in direct danger. Mind you, this girl lived across country and had never met him in person, but was always telling him how much she loved him and cared about him. This is when the online threats really started to get serious and scary. There were several times I had to pack a bag and tell the kids we were having a slumber party at my friend's house, when in reality, I was getting death threats. I had a pretty traumatic childhood, so I know what it's like healing from childhood trauma, and I didn't want that for my kids. Obviously, once they were asleep, that was a different story, and I would spend most, if not all, night crying. I couldn't even sleep with a fan on, and my ex-husband had recently made a Chris Watts reference, so that's when I knew we needed to move.
What it do, everyday people, man? It's your boy PJ. Today we back with another lit video. Back in the confessional, and yes, we staying lit, big dog, man. Shout out to my everyday people who rock with me every day. Shout out to my player partner, Lucky Wheels of Deals. He keeps it lit. Make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe to this video. Let me know what y'all think about this in the comment section, man. Hit the link down below. We got HiveMindLabs.com, okay, where you can use the discount code everydaypj, man, at checkout, man. Just click the link, okay, if you just want to explore, and if you really feel like buying something, buy it. That's it. Ain't nothing to it. But I do want to give a special shout out. I want to give a big shout out to Nicole B. I'm not going to put her full name out there because, whatever. Michelle and Nicole B. Man, real MVP. Real MVP. Some of y'all need to take a note, okay? When I was like, I need some people to start donating for the 100,000. Tamika, shout out to her. Abigail, you know, people that came through. You know what I'm saying? They helped your boy out, man. I'm talking about like all this hard work and stuff, and just keeping it funky. You know what I'm saying? After the ban and all, and TikTok is coming back, so you know I'm jumping on it. You know, as soon as we, you know, I see people liking again, I can pull up videos again. I'm like, we own it, right? We own it. So we back on it, man. Story time. This story is very crazy. I've never had to deal with somebody personally that I've dated that has been gone crazy, but I have had family members that have been going through some things. And what's crazy is that you see it, and you don't believe it. First you're like, oh man, they just going through something, okay? And then second, then you just like, man. And then the third, you like, you know what I'm saying? You want to help them. You want to do what you can do. And then even as I went as far as like even trying to help my family member get a job, and I was just like, I don't even know if he's gonna go through it. One time I was driving on the south side, and I seen my cousin, and I was like, it was hot as hell, and he had on long sleeve shirts, and I was like, it's gotta be 103 outside, you know what I'm saying? So I had to bust a U-turn. Where I was, I didn't bust a U-turn. I had to go all the way around because I was off the highway. And I tried to find him. I was like, I don't know where this dude went, but I know he's over here. So I drove around for 10 minutes. I didn't see him. But I think what he may have done was just walk through the parking lot of, it's like a car dealership. And I was just like, man, I was just going to give him a ride. Because, you know, well, it is what it is. I see him all the time, and I know, you know, I see him in libraries. I see him all the time. Hey, man, you need something? Here's $20. I know he might need it, he might not, but I give it to him just because I'm like, if you hungry, I could feed you because you're my cousin, and I know, and I love you, regardless of what you're going through. And I know that's how she feels. Like, that's her husband. She love him. Although their marriage is being destroyed, she sees it's not just him, it's something going on. But then, to have someone interfere in that is another level of crazy. Because all this stuff was playing out on TikTok. She's a big influencer. So shout out to Max Areeg. I don't know if that's how you say her name. Reeg, Areeg. It's just like, it goes from if you just feel sympathy to you actually enabling this man. And TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, all these places have the worst comment sections of all. And yes, you can't go through block and stop people from seeing your or commenting. And like, people can comment under Everyday PJ and they'll never know that they can't comment. Um, and I can block them from my Instagram and my Facebook, but that doesn't mean that they won't put it out there and say crazy stuff under my comments before I notice it. So it it's that stuff. The people in these comments be so crazy, and they just don't understand that they are enabling themselves and putting themselves in someone else's lives, and they don't realize how bad they're making the situation. And they really don't care. Like, people on TikTok really do not care. They are the worst commenters in the world. I remember my biggest viral post, because it's went viral several times, twice under my Facebook, under my Instagram, under my TikTok. I think it went viral under my Instagram or Facebook, one of them. But what it was it was me posting a picture, and I was saying, my wife sent me this picture while she was on vacation of me in the bed, and it was another girl in there, and it was like a camera that took the picture or whatever. And so people was like, "Oh, you wrong for bringing another girl in your bed," and all this stuff. And I was all type of dogs, and I ain't shit. And before it went viral, I was still posting other content. So I was just going about my normal content, right? And then, but I didn't have my woman on the content. It was just all me. And so they was like, "Yeah, I'm glad she left you and all this stuff." And I was just like, wow. So then I just started to troll back, because they had no idea that somebody else liked my video. So I don't know, like, TikTok is back. But what the picture was actually, we was trying out, we was having a baby. So we was trying out the nanny cam, see what nanny cams work the best. And so this particular camera had a night vision. So she took a screenshot of it and sent it to me. And when she sent me the screenshot, I thought I'd have a little fun with it. And I posted it on Instagram, because it was actually her getting off from me. Y'all kind of get the gist of why she was getting off of me. But, and it was her getting off of me. So you see like her silhouette, and you see my silhouette, and I'm on the bed like this, and man's up, man down. It was a pretty graphic. You can go see it. It's still on my TikTok right now. If y'all can get to it, because some of the stuff on TikTok you really can't get to. But anyway, needless to say, what had happened was, she had they started going in on the girl. It's like, "Oh, look at her. She is the type that'll cheat with a married man, a girl that wears a messy bun," or something like that. Just started talking noise. I was like, talking crap, talking about, size and stuff like that. And it was just on and on and on. Well, it turns out it was her, actually. But TikTok dogged the shit out of her. And it was kind of upsetting. It was like, damn, it went from a joke to them bashing me to them bashing her, not knowing it was her. And it was her that sent me the picture. And I told her that I was posting it, because you couldn't really see anything. It was just like, and I was posting it as a joke. So, needless to say, they didn't know, and they went in on her. So, yeah, TikTok The people that view, the random people that view your page ain't shit. So it's not surprising that they would get into this woman's lives and build on to the crap that's already going on in her life, and they don't really care. So it is what it is. Everyday people, let me know what y'all think about this in the comment section. Like, comment, and subscribe. I'm gonna holler at you later. Peace.